My mother kept a strange machine in a cupboard under the stairs. For my brother and me, it was always a sort of magic box. Every time we looked at it, we were transported into an alien world, where our grandfather obviously played an important role. This made him a somewhat mysterious figure in our childhood. We were aware he was very famous, although we knew relatively little about his adventurous life. It had all happened so long ago and so far away.
And all
Oh, good. It started when I saw, as a child, I saw the glass photographs of his, of this strange country with these three-dimensional photographs, and they always fascinated me because they were like nothing else I'd ever seen before. And then I gradually learnt about his extraordinary life and became more and more interested in his career as I got older, and I was able to collect pictures from his life and read about his extraordinary captivity in the Sudan and all that. Grandfather wrote this book after his escape across the Sudanese desert. It made him famous overnight as Slatin Pasha, known as a charming man about town, and even as a regular guest of Queen Victoria's. He was lionized throughout Europe for his extraordinary adventures.
My children say to me, "Why do you know nothing about your father?" And I said, well, you know, if he'd lived quite a bit longer and I'd been older, I wouldn't have been so silly about it. I would have talked to him about it. But as it was, I was always embarrassed that, you know, when we were in the hotel or came out to lunch, chiefly women used to come up and say, "Oh, you know, you're Slatin Pasha, we've always heard about you, your wonderful life, you know, and I'm having a luncheon party next week, will you come?" and that sort of thing. And I disliked all that.
The fact that he became so involved with the English from a small suburb of Vienna in Austria, that he'd gone to work in the Sudan as an Austrian. I mean, I always think of him as completely stateless, really, a man who wasn't interested in being Austrian or English or Egyptian or anything. He was just following what was happening in front of him all the time, I suspect.
Slatin was for partitioning the Sudan into, because it's an enormous country, into the south and the west. You know, you've had nothing but wars in both those two areas almost ever since. I'd love to go out there and to see again the places that I've seen so many old photographs. I mean, I've got all these photographs from the 1890s. It would be fascinating to try and find the same places now and compare them and the changes. Been very interesting.
Do you know which bus goes to Khartoum? 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 No bus? No bus? Khartoum? You go Khartoum? Khartoum. Hello, how are you?
How are you going?
I'm going to Khartoum. شكرا.
Grandfather bought a camel here to ride to the Nile at Berber, but I'm taking this bus, which they say will take 10 hours. On the way I went to Slatin, which is where he actually landed, but it's just all in ruins now.
بحي الملكية. غنم بحي الملكية الساعة 3 عصرا.
In 1874, when grandfather arrived here, Suakin was an infamous transfer centre for the African slave trade, and it was also a transit point for the thousands of pilgrims from across North Africa en route to Mecca. At that time, Suakin was the Sudan's principal point of entry. It was also the only part of the Sudan that the British held on to throughout the Mahdiya, and many bloody battles were fought nearby to maintain this precarious island foothold.
So your grandfather came into quite a complicated political situation in the Sudan in the 1870s.
So who was running the Sudan?
Well, Sudan at this stage was a part of what we call the Turco-Egyptian Empire, and it was being run really by Egypt. But there are a number of European officials who had been appointed by the ruler of Egypt to govern Sudan.
Like Chinese Gordon?
Yes, General Gordon, or Chinese Gordon as he was sometimes called, was at that stage the Governor-General, and it was he who invited your grandfather to come out and serve as an official. Your grandfather had already made an earlier visit to Sudan, on an exploratory mission, as it were, but he subsequently became...
Where he met Emin Pasha.
Where he met Emin Pasha, and it was Emin who recommended him to Gordon, and that was how he came into the service of the Egyptian government in Sudan.
Take up to your room.
Thank you.
Go this way. Thank you. Straight down in the corridor, please. Thank you.
That was some journey. It may have been a bit quicker and more comfortable than in Grandpapa's time, but I find that everything here is controlled. All my movements are restricted. But I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm going to approach everything with the same spirit of adventure and optimism that Grandpapa must have had.
I found out that I needed various permits to be able to travel around the country, and even to take photographs. And for these, I had to present myself to the Ministry of Information. What a strange office. No customers, hardly any officials, and certainly no permits. I'll just have to wait and see, I guess. Having had no success with the permits, I went to visit the market in Omdurman, opposite Khartoum, on the west bank of the Nile. It was where grandfather spent his 10 years of captivity. The town was founded by the Mahdi after the sack of Khartoum, and is to this day the religious center of the Sudan. On every corner, there is a tea stall where women sell spicy tea. In the stifling heat, it surprisingly quenches the thirst better than a cold drink. There is a relaxed and formal atmosphere around these stalls, and I found it very easy to strike up a conversation with people there. In Morocco, they drink mint tea. It's just mint.
Yeah, just mint. Yeah,
it's delicious.
Don't like.
You don't like it?
Make no sense.
That's how I met John, a young Sudanese who speaks good English. He's from the south, he told me, and he kindly offered to guide me through the twisting lanes of the market.
Yeah. He took it by power.
And what tribe was he?
He is from Jali. So Sudan is the exact, how do you say it? It is the exact core of the Africanism.
Yes.
It shows the diversity in the continent. If you want to divide up Sudan, you may divide it in many countries if you go according to the race and ethnicity.
So what happened after the end of colonial, after the end of the British in 1956?
Well, after Ismail Lazari took the power from British, follows a lot of military coups and military leaders, where one of them is Jafar Mamadi Meri. You have heard of.
Oh, yes.
It's a long range.
Yes.
And there comes some elections, but always the coup keep going on. And as you know, in 1989, Bashir again took the power from the elected prime minister.
And he was a military... It was Sadiq al-Mahdi who was removed as prime minister in 1989 in the coup by Bashir. Sadiq is still active in politics, in opposition to President Bashir. In spite of the arrest warrant against him for genocide from the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Bashir has just easily won the last elections. Sadiq belongs to the influential family of the founder of Sudanese independence, the man to whom my grandfather surrendered 135 years ago, Mohammed Ahmed, universally known as the Mahdi. I have been invited to meet the Mahdi's grandson at his house in Omdurman. How amazing to meet the grandson of my grandfather's adversary. I really have no idea what to expect.
The Imam is now waiting for you.
Thank you.
This way, please.
How do you do?
Imam, it's a great honor to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Very great.
I would like very much to welcome you at the Mahdi's house.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all my people and all the grand sons of the Mahdi and his friends, to greet you on behalf of them all.
Thank you.
And your grandfather was a great man, and we know him very well, and a lot of him. And we are very happy to receive you in Sudan.
Thank you.
And we wish you this will be your home as well.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. It's a very, very great honor for me to be welcomed here by you so kindly.
Thank you very much. Sit down, please.
Please. I brought you a photograph.
Yes.
Of my grandfather as a mulazim.
Oh, mashallah, mashallah. Mashallah. You know this area is called Mulazmin.
Mulazmin. Oh, this area?
This area.
Is it?
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
Oh, there's a
And this
coincidence.
house is built on the headquarters of the Mulazmin area.
Oh, well, there you are.
Yes, yes. And your grandfather must have been in this place actually because he's part of the Mulazmin.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yes, yes. This is a very beautiful picture.
And you know the story.
Now
of
he was in the Austrian army.
Before he was, yes.
Yes, I see.
Before he came to the Sudan.
Before he came to Sudan.
Yes,
when he got
was-
Gordon's letter.
Yes, he was in
Of
Bosnia.
yes,
with
he was in Bosnia.
Crown Prince Rudolph's regiment in Bosnia.
Yes. At that time, officers could just switch from army.
No, he had to ask.
Permission.
And they gave him permission.
Oh, I see.
He did 3 years, I think.
Yes.
And then he asked permission to come to the Sudan, and they gave him the permission.
Yes, yes, very interesting.
Rudolf Slatin was the son of a silk dyer from Obersankt Veit, then a poor suburb of Vienna. His father was a Bohemian Jew who had moved to Vienna and converted to Christianity. The family was ostensibly near the bottom of the Austrian social hierarchy and therefore had little to offer to a young man of ambition. He was 17 when on his father's death he went to Cairo to work in a bookshop. He soon joined an expedition traveling in the Sudan and remained there for nearly 2 years when he had to go home for his military service. He returned to the Sudan in 1878 as a young but battle-hardened lieutenant. Good. And I believe, is it possible you met my brother a long time ago? In 1965 he came here.
I might have done.
And he said, I think he met you.
Yes.
Did you go to Cambridge?
I was in Oxford.
Oh, you were in Oxford?
Yes.
Same as me.
Really? Which college?
I was in Oriel.
Oh, really? How are you? It's nice.
And you?
I was in New College.
New College,
Yes.
very near.
Yes, very near. Yes, yes, how interesting. And what did you study?
I studied English literature.
And what time was that?
65 to 68.
I see. We went earlier than you.
Yes.
I went down at 57.
All right.
And
Yes, me and my brother and my sister, we all live in London.
I see.
Grandfather's extraordinary adventures had catapulted him into European high society. In middle age, he married Baroness Alice von Ramberg, and in 1916, Anne-Marie, our mother, was born. His wife died very soon, within 5 years. So he brought up my mother alone.
I see.
An old man with a little girl.
Yes, I see.
Every summer we came to England for 3 months, from middle of June till the middle of September, to stay and see his old friends from the Sudan days. So we came as usual that summer and found that there was an invitation from the palace, from the King and Queen, to come and lunch. They always asked him when he came to England, but this time they asked him and said, would you bring your daughter? And he was terribly excited over this, to show his daughter off. I wasn't very excited because I knew I was at my most ugly, you know. when you're about sort of 12, you aren't very pretty on the whole. And so I had to have a dress found for me, and I had to be told what to say and so forth. And then we went to Buckingham Palace, where it is very grand in those days. There was just Queen Mary, the King, my father and me, and nobody else to lunch, which is very unusual. And they had a piper blowing the pipes who walked round the table. That's an old sort of Scottish custom. And it was all wonderful, except I was so frightened that I didn't really enjoy it very much.
This here is in 1957, I think. My father was with Nixon.
Oh.
Nixon.
President Nixon.
President Nixon. At that time, he was vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And behind him there is the foreign minister, our foreign minister Mahjoub, and some of the leading leaders of the Sudan. Here you have my brother with President Nasser. He presenting him with a sword when he visited the Sudan in 1960. Now there is a very important photograph of my father with Churchill.
That's wonderful.
When he was Prime Minister.
Yes.
And this is in Downing Street.
Oh,
in that famous fireplace.
right.
Where Churchill and the British Prime Ministers are photographed with their guests. And normally Churchill, as you know, holds his cigar.
Yes.
In this photograph, he hid the cigar.
He hid the cigar?
Yeah. He told the photographer, wait a minute. I won't allow you to photograph me with the Mahdi's son, with a cigar in my mouth.
That's quite right.
Yes, because he knows the Mahdi forbid.
Yes. He forbade tobacco.
But tobacco.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but tobacco.
yes.
It's a wonderful spot.
Well, this, of course, now the broadcasting station is here.
Oh, yes.
And this is a public garden.
Meeting the Mahdi's grandson was a fascinating experience because he was such an urbane and sophisticated man. And when I was talking to him, it occurred to me how very clever the English were. They would take the children of their enemies and educate them in England, so that eventually all the British Empire was ruled by people who were very friendly to England.
So the Mahdi appeared out of relative obscurity in 1881.
Yes, and one really has to understand the success of his movement in the context of wider events in Africa at the time. Right across West Africa, since the 18th century, there have been a number of Islamic revival movements, which all called on ideas of righting injustice, bringing back a better Islamic society, and were remarkably successful in overthrowing established governments across the continent.
Particularly the Turks.
Well, in the case of Sudan, yes, this was a revolt against the Turco-Egyptian government. But remember, Sudan, although it looks remote from a European perspective, is in fact at a crossroads in terms of the Islamic world. The pilgrimage routes from West Africa go right through Sudan. So the impact of the success of earlier jihadist movements in West Africa was very powerful in Sudan. There was a ferment of ideas about Islam and the righting of injustice and the revival of religion, which were very important to the Mahdi's success.
الإمام المهدي مسك الموت وقراه سبحان الله الزول ده حارب الله ما حاربنا نحن ما عارفين نعمل معه وده أداه العلم وأداه جواب.
The Mahdi began his mission on Abba Island, on the Nile, some 200 kilometers south of Khartoum. It was here that the ascetic holy man first revealed himself after a vision in a cave as the Mahdi, the expected one, a prophet of Islam.
The Mahdi is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his family migrated to the Sudan centuries ago from Cairo, and they lived among the Sudanese people, very well respected and looked after.